Hey, everybody, tune in to Recent Tartarians.
Recent Tartarians. Recent Tartarians. Recent Tartarians. Recent Tartarians.
Hey, everybody, tune in to Recent Tartarians.
What's up, everybody? Well, another fine day, another interesting day. There's nothing interesting going on in the news again, which is my favorite kind of day because then I can talk about things I want to talk about. But let's pretend that there's anything to talk about in the news. Okay, just really quickly, what's happening? Apparently, there's a relationship in Hollywood that everyone obsesses over. I'm not really interested in ever even weighing in on this, except for to say that it's amazing that she wears whatever outfit he wore the day before, which is like, some pretty gnarly MK Ultra stuff. And they keep wearing the B on their little collar and things like that. Something very strange about this case. I mean, except for the fact that it's like super obvious that right now, during the amphibious assault period, let me just do that real quick. Taiwan, ooh, you know what? I wonder if anyone says this on Twitter. Taiwan amphibious assault. And is that right, or is there an E in there? I'm going to just check myself out. I almost feel like, no, we're good. We're good. Okay. So, amphibious assault. China sends 39 aircrafts, mostly fighter jets, near Taiwan, the largest show of force in months. This is back in January. Let's do a latest thing. May 16th. That's what, yesterday. China have to take Taiwan by amphibious assault. The Russians are getting slaughtered when they can drive their tanks across nice flat fields. Imagine what casualties will be if China tries them on Taiwan, landing in the beaches. So there's some interesting things about this. I don't know how long until this happens. It should have been in the next, I was thinking between May 5th and the end of May. China prepares 3 Type 075 amphibious assault ships for possible Taiwan assault. This has been going on for a while. The other thing is China making islands. Let me see if I can go that. China makes islands. What could happen if China invades Taiwan? Someone else is thinking about it in different ways. Everything else. China's artificial islands. Everything you need to know about China's artificial islands. Extending south of China and ringed in by the Philippines, Vietnam, Brunei, and Malaysia is a 1.35 million square mile body of water known as the South China Sea. If it truly is the case, if it truly is the case that East Asia is the global economy center of gravity, then the South China Sea might be its singularity. In 1405, the Chinese admiral Zheng He set sail with a fleet of treasure ships, traveling to neighboring nations and eventually as far as Mombasa, spreading knowledge of China's wealth. Today, the South China Sea is again a venue for China to display its power through a very different fleet. Although from on high, the sea may seem a blue wasteland, punctuated occasionally by specks of an uninhabited land, the islands have seen a frenzy of activity in recent years. China has constructed a series of artificial islands throughout the area. These artificial islands are a showcase of China's engineering, and the muscle flexing has provoked strong reactions from China's neighbors in the region, particularly the Philippines, which brought a suit against China to the Permanent Court of Arbitration in The Hague. On July 12, 2016, the International Tribunal ruled against China. However, the superpower refused to acknowledge the decision or even the court's jurisdiction. So, how do you build an island? It's pretty obvious. You get a ship in there. It pulls up dirt from underground. It puts it into an area clumped around the ship. And eventually you build a port, right? And let's see if I got that right. The answer is the same thing. Most islands are made of sand. The process for building an island is remarkably simple. The first requirement is for an island is a base to build on. Naturally formed islands don't float on water. Rather, an island is simply the top visible part of landmass that is mostly underwater. To construct its artificial island, China built atop already existing island rocks and even coral reefs. And that's a bigger, interesting thing that you'll see because it's built on top of a living, landmass. That's not even a land. That's like building an island that can support airstrips and other military installations requiring a lot of sand, however, to gather it. China used a fleet of dredger ships designed to pick up and move material from the sea floor. These dredgers use large tubes with cutting attachments. Okay, so they're cutting, drilling, pulling up dirt, making these islands. These islands then become ports. Their ships can come into their ports. Then they can extend what? Like, what's the point? Why would they make islands? I mean, why is it beyond just that it's neat to control nature and macro? Why would China commit this particular macro engineering project? So because now they have an island they can put their port around, and they have a new area of protection. I think it's like 100 miles outside of their island coast they're allowed to protect, and the more they do this, the more they can control the South China Sea. Is there anything I'm missing here? Transforming coral reefs, China's extending military capabilities, radar, all these buildings give China the ability to project force through the region, blah, blah, blah. Obvious, but it's a go game. Because one island to the next island, they can extend their way across until they're literally in other people's territories. And that's pretty crazy. China's island building, and also it'll psychologically mean that China's not so far away, because China exists right next door. In fact, China is existing in your own hometown. And they're wondering what you're doing there, because it's their China. That's kind of the extension of the Go game. But is this great for the environment? What's the ecological impact? The political implications of island building plan are dire, but the environmental consequences are as well. Coral reefs are delicate ecosystems made up of thousands of various creatures. And the sand piled on top of the reef smothers these organisms. This is troubling because although reefs occupy a tiny fraction of the world's oceans, they're among the most important and populous marine areas, supporting thousands of different species. The damage does not stop at the reefs either. Well, this might sound kind of hippy-dippy, but as like a Californian, man, I don't know if you ever seen, like, coral reefs right now look like strippers' butts. They've just been bleached of all their color around the world. They've lost all of there's a few great reefs left, but some of the most beautiful reefs in the world are just starting to die out. And first they get this cancer and they lose their vibrancy of color. And it sucks. And there's a lot of reefs that are going to just go extinct. And likely, if that happens, there'll still be life in this ocean. But some of these more fragile things that are going to be replaced by some sort of like primordial soup, right, it sucks sometimes. I mean, slime is cool. Like, I'm for slime. But a coral reef, does it need to go? All right. So, and then they're burying these ones during its like major extinction period, because the sea levels, heats, and things are temperamental to the life of a coral reef. It can only live in certain areas very well. So, sucks to be a coral reef. They ruled against it. Nothing ever happened. So, I guess I got the point. 5 hours ago, though, what could happen if China invaded Taiwan? Beijing working hard to take over Taipei military. U.S. officials warn ever since Taiwan's rapid economic and democratic transformation in the 1980s and 90s, relations with the superpowering neighbor China have swung between frosty silence to outright threats of invasion. Described by The Economist as the most dangerous place on Earth due to its proximity to Beijing, which views it as a breakaway province, the island has for months faced a pattern of what Taipei views as stepped-up military harassment by Beijing, Reuters said. The ongoing dispute has drawn in powers from around the globe, with Joe Biden restating the U.S.'s commitment to defending its Asian-Pacific ally, and Secretary of State Antony Blinken calling for the island's meaningful participation at the UN. Which is ironic, because remember, Taiwan was the permanent seat on the UN board. And then China comes in and, America acknowledging China, I think is how it started. Then Taiwan comes back in the morning to sit down in their chair. And I say Taiwan, but it was really the ambassador for the state, or the nation. Taiwan is then realizing that their chair is filled. The ambassador is realizing that Taiwan's chair is filled, and they're like, what's going on? The permanent seat of Taiwan has been manipulated and taken. The true China is, because also Taiwan's considering itself true China at this point. And then they say, no, actually, your seat's been taken and given to this state, and now their country is the permanent seat, and you're not even. It's like, what do I sit even? Well, you're not even a country. Well, great. What do I do? Well, you're an American trading partner, so you don't need to be a country. So that's the beginning of some pretty crazy things that happen. And to pretend that we're really like allies with Taiwan after what we did to them is, clearly. And again with the we, this is America at its finest, though. Really. So Taiwan super military grows. Latest, our view is China is working hard to effectively put themselves into a position in which their military is capable of taking Taiwan over our intervention. Haynes said she declined to provide a timeline when asked when an invasion could happen, stating that it is not yet known what lessons China has learned from Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Haynes and Defense Intelligence Agency head Lieutenant General Scott Barrier also told the committee that it is believed that China would rather not use force to take the island. Beijing would rather do this peaceably over time, Barrier said. Clearly, the Chinese leadership is trying to look carefully about the lessons they should draw from Ukraine about their own ambitions in Taiwan. I don't think for a minute it's eroded Xi's determination over time to gain control over Taiwan. But I think it's something that's affecting their calculations about how they're going to go do that. So it could be that we've got a slight delay. We could have a slight extension period. Doubt it. I think this is just either what's the word? Obtuse optimism or false optimism, something like that. This is not real. Clearly, China's going to Taiwan soon. It's too clear. They've been planning it. Their dictators are older. This is their time. And, by looking at what's going on with Russia, like Russia's really benefited by you look at the Russian ruble gold standard. Let's do that also really quickly. Oh, no. Unlikely to last, Asia says. Position itself to move to the gold standard. Why gold standard? Note on the gold standard. Okay, just check these out really quickly. All of these things, it's crazy. Ruble has recovered after initial collapse, but move to gold parity will be difficult and risky to sustain. I mean, yeah, of course. And then they can move on to like crypto associated golds. They can make their currency. I mean, that's basically what they're doing. They're going to make like digitally tracked gold standard. And they could also have a petro ruble and as well. So this is pretty logical. Positions itself to move the ruble to a gold standard. This already happened. And look at this. They don't even want to talk about it. But why Russia has put the ruble on a gold standard, but it's unlikely to last. Everyone just thinks it's impossible to keep it going because what will happen is the West is going to start sucking all the gold out and keeping it in their own hands because this is a really quick way for Russia to collect more and more gold. I mean, Russia clearly already has a lot of gold. And by calling their demands in gold, then, yeah, I mean, this is going to be crazy. And this is, I think the value of the ruble went down, the amount of rubles necessary for a dollar. And then they were like, by this point, it's already almost back to normal. Granted, it was already on its way up by the time Russia was invading the Russian gold standard. And then things have petered out in a pretty good fashion, but actually are starting to even become more valuable as time goes on. And gold is going up. So you can just imagine that this is like the greatest and most true defense that you could do is to actually use the gold standard. So I was saying get in on the ruble like a few months ago, almost as a joke, but yeah, you should have done it. All right, last piece of nonsense, last piece of today's news, because who cares? But I'll do it anyway. The first public congressional hearing on UFOs in 50 years. Show the valuable data. HuffPost, really? Pentagon officials to testify at UFOs. You guys know about this? I forgot if I talked about this already. I did this on somebody's show. We're talking about UFOs and how that's not like a real thing. And you guys watch UAP. Shout out to UAP. God bless you. So UAP is a cool thing. Cool guy and a cool thing. Unidentified aerial phenomena. So there's also, let me go to, we already did this. I know. UATTIP, is that right? There's the AATT, yeah, there's the AATIP. But where's the UATPF? UATPF, okay. Because, there's words for stuff. UAPTF. Yeah, you see? You think I don't know? You think you're hiding anything from me? That's ridiculous. All right, the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, which is a long dead, completely forgotten, run by crazy people who just stopped everything they were doing, okay? And there's no more effort looking into this. It's over. Until they started the UAPTF, which is the continual thing, starting formation in 2020 and then existing through the IMSG, which is not to be confused with other forms of MSG. But there is the AOIMEX, I think it's called. Or did I do that wrong? No. AOIM Mexic. There we go. The Mexic. And so this is the real, because like at some point you can't find all of the paperwork for like what research they're getting because it's too new, right? The stuff that's in 2020 and 2021, 2022, but you can get stuff from 2017 because that's like a whole administration ago, and they're just trying to mess with each other. And the reason is because it's not about, get this, it's not about aliens. It's about unidentified aerial phenomenon from the government and from other agencies within the same government, which have become confused about each other and themselves. So, Deputy Secretary of Defense, Washington, 2021 memorandum for senior Pentagon leadership, commanders of the combatant fields, defense agency, and field activity. So this comes into like the money, but like the AOI, MSG, and the Airborne Objective Identification and Management Executive Council, the ALMEXIC, designed to look for drones and for UFOs, right? But unidentified drones, right? Because if something's flying by and they don't know what it is, it's a UFO. That's all it is. So more interesting than fantastical, I think, because people are going to be just like, but maybe, but I don't think that's really what we're worried about. It's more about this stuff, because if China has, I mean, you guys remember the guy? Who's the guy? Oh, that's right. They don't know his name. Jetpack Los Angeles. I'm just going to say it like that. See if that works. Mysterious Jetpack Man. Was this Elon Musk? Probably. Maybe not. Could have been somebody else. I mean, if you think Elon Musk is limber enough, then good for him. But what did that say? Mysterious Jetpack Man is not the only person to take flights in unconventional ways. No, screw that. It's this guy. Some guy, a Boeing Aviation Administration spokesperson said that a Boeing 747 pilot reported seeing an object that must have resembled a jetpack at about 6:30 p.m. on Wednesday. It was about 15 miles east of the airport at the LAX, flying at an elevation about 5,000 feet. An air controller alerted pilots in the area of an abundance of caution. SkyWest, did you see a UFO? Asked the air traffic controller in one transmission. We are looking, but we did not see Iron Man, a pilot responded. Okay, so inside jokes abound here. Somebody knows something, pretending they don't. Not the first sighting of a jetpack man near LAX. A China Airlines crew saw a person in a jetpack flying about 6,000 feet in October. So there's more unidentified flying objects. People that have money in California that are making these things for their labs, I think also. Maybe billionaire, maybe not. But this is interesting to some people because program announcement and release of data has started to come out, and I guess right now today it's trending because someone's going to have to testify on some of the program. And I don't know, the other crazy thing, did you see, what's that guy's name? Podesta on Ancient Aliens. There you go. So John Podesta on Ancient Aliens was a trip. Like, he was literally on Ancient Aliens. It was like the episode about like the Trump administration's release of alien files. I don't even want to see his face, really. It's kind of gross. But it was weird that he was on Ancient Aliens. And they didn't really talk about everything else. But yeah, John Podesta stars in documentary, quote unquote, suggesting Clinton lost because of aliens. Well, that's not exactly what it says. But, I mean, I like the way they put that because that's the safest angle that you can probably get out of it. I don't think that's really what, but maybe, I don't know. Okay, I almost recommend watching that because I think it's really interesting. That's pretty weird, right? Like, who's John Podesta? You're terrifying. That they didn't even address anything, and then they brought up the Q alien UFO UAP paperwork, and I think January. I think they brought up everything. That's really weird. I don't know. That stranges me out. Okay, so today we're going to talk a little bit about, what was this episode called? Oh yeah, the Sahara Sea. Because people keep saying things happened millions of years ago. Dubé put out this video that kind of echoed some of Graham Hancock's things on things being 20,000 years old, 100,000 years old, and everything like that. And so I wanted to address some of those ideas because I think there's a psychological, pathological obsession with making things older than they are, because just a bigger number is more impressive, and people think, oh, surely this was built 100,000 years ago. But they don't understand erosion and how erosion works. And then they're using other data from people who do kind of understand erosion, because there are experts and scientists out there. But I think they're looking at the wrong experts, because a lot of the experts will also say, oh, yeah, well, in this area where nothing's happened, very briefly, like, you look at any example in nature. I mean, and also I have maybe a bias from living by the sea, living by the ocean all of my life. I've seen water erosion from waves that are, a certain kind of erosion, and, sea rocks, which are slowly eroded, versus river rocks, which river rocks will erode much faster if they're in a fast-flowing river all the time. And you can see paths of stones that people have set up, and they've actually been eroded on purpose, so that there's like this weird, almost arched bridge thing, and a smoothed-out rock path from someone probably like 100, 200 years ago in Santa Cruz, in the mountains, laid out a bunch of rocks somehow, and I'm imagining with like horses, but it could have even been with trains, because they had trains in Santa Cruz that long ago. And then they set up these paths everywhere of rocks, which as time went on were straightened out even more and more, because they're just like filled up with giant gravel, and like things like that exist. Okay. But the other thing is, the pyramids we were talking about, the Bible says they weren't, the Bible doesn't say anything about the pyramids. There's no mention of them. They were built by, it's just not mentioned. It does talk about building projects in Egypt being committed by Moses's tribes of Levi and, Nephi and whatever. I mean, arguably Nephi, because the Mormons talk about the Ephraim groups too, but nobody really says the pyramids ever. So it's like it's a non-issue. But when you look at the pyramids, it's important because that building site and the history of the building of the pyramids, along with Sphinx, which could be older than the pyramids, perhaps. It's outside of. People like to say it was built by Ramses, or that it was built by who's that said that they built it right now? Hold on. Pyramids, Wikipedia. Oh, and you have to do Pyramid of Giza, because there's other pyramids, and Wikipedia knows that. Great Pyramids of Giza, 26th century BC, built by Khufu? Pharaoh Khufu. And so here's Khufu, and they're saying Khufu built the pyramids, and that might be a little much also. I mean, it's one thing to say it's built by aliens, but it's another thing to say it's built by this one guy. But they say there's like 3 generations of pharaohs that were involved in the pyramids. And, I'm not a big like ancient aliens guy on the pyramids, because I think there's a lot of easier ways to build the pyramids that people don't realize. So let's start with the first thing, which is what's called the floating stones, like pyramid floating stones, papyrus. Let me see if we can find pictures of that. So there's water brought in. And you have to remember, the entire pyramid is wrapped around with this moat. And there's water coming in from the Nile through Giza. And that's a whiles away, but we'll get to that point, why that's interesting. But the water spins around, and you remember also, when you look at this square building is surrounded by water. Now, what else is like this? Let's do a star fort really quickly, just to remind you how star forts work. So star fort, granted, there's often a square at the center of 8, or something. It depends on how it's been built. This is like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Where's the 6th one? 6-point star fort. There's 6-point star forts. There's 8-point star forts. But if you get the 8-point star forts, you'll find squares, particularly in the 8-point star forts, right? Because it's double what you're counting. That's how that's going to work. So there are star forts of different shapes around there, and it seems like 8 as opposed to 7 as opposed to 5 matters in terms of why they've built their star forts certain ways. I mean, look at this crazy one right here, right? Star forts squared in the center, again. So you'll see it. Like there really are like star forts that have been, their walls have been destroyed for whatever reason, and then the square has been saved of the star fort. So I'm proposing that Giza was built upon the remnants of a former star fort. Now also, the idea is rocks are brought in the water, wrapped in papyrus, and then they're put into an area where blocks have been dropped so that they keep they're watertight. And then the papyrus block is floated up, right? So you've got it in the center of this area. And how tall is it? Well, as tall as the blocks have been since they've moved it. And then you start to build a kind of chimney of water. And then the base, the block is pushed in, again, floated in, because it's going along this river path to the base of this pyramid. And there's a bottom tunnel that's a perfect degree built. And Archimedean spirals also important to look at. Let's do that really quick. Archimedean spiral. Yeah. So an Archimedean spiral. Well, drill. So the drill is built like this, and you can imagine, instead of this being a hand crank, it's also attached to a turbine, or rather a water turbine that's spinning because of the water flow. And iron dust, copper dust, and sand and volcanic dust, particularly volcanic dust, is thrown in with olive oil. And as it spins, it starts to drill a hole, and it just continually spins forever, day and night. And so that's the one of the ways that with really simple tools, these things can be done. I know people are like, "Aren't you gonna say everything was floated by UFOs?" And like, this is an Occam's razor thing. I'm not saying we don't have UFO technology, but there's more interesting things to do here, and I want to bring that up. So, in terms of macro engineering projects, like, how big of a deal is this? It doesn't seem like okay, so we brought some water from Giza. Let me do the Google Maps to show you. We brought some water from the Nile to Giza. And you're going to see a lot more. Okay. This is a lot more important than you might realize. So, first off, Giza, pulling out a bit here. Pushed on the satellite maps again. Waiting for it to load on this big blue dot that people call the Earth. Little do they know. Okay, so there's a big old sea over there, and there's a lot of water over here, and most of this area has been green for a long time. And you've got the Port of Alexandria is full of seawater, but there's fresh water, and the Nile coming through Cairo is fresh water. So you have a lot of fresh water that flows here, but sometimes things used to flow more. You can see there's giant rivers coming from South Sudan, and there's even more water up here that used to be even more relevant in Ethiopia. And if you watch The Mummy Returns, I think that takes place in Ethiopia or Eritrea. I'm pretty sure it's in North Ethiopia. And The Mummy Returns, a second mummy movie, because you find out that the older pyramids are really from Ethiopia, but also you see these giant lakes, Uganda and Kampala, and Ethiopia's lake doesn't look as big. These are huge lakes, and they used to be even bigger lakes, and they're spotted everywhere, so they're once part of each other. There's also big mountains here. The Bali Mountain Park, right, is this giant area right here. So there's huge mountains, and because of that, this is above sea level, and the water will flow downhill. And so a number of places where water's flowed. Now, there's another thing over here, if you recall. This is Chad. Chad used to be a giant lake. And there was another giant, the Uganda lake was even bigger. And then there's even a river system that used to flow from Atlas, which is Morocco, into Mali, through Libya and Mauritania, and then in through Nigeria to the Chad. And the Chad also had river systems that went into Libya, and then into, although some people try to argue this, because this is an area where it's less clear, right, here. But the idea that there were river systems that connected the Mega Chad to Egypt wadis particularly. A wadi is supposedly a river that comes and goes. I mean, that's in our own history. That's in a recent enough history that people have talked about wadis connecting the Mega Chad. So let's do a thing on that really quickly. Let's see. Mega Chad. Is this picture going to work? Okay, here's the Mega Chad. I think this is the picture that I used for the video. Lake Congo. Huge. 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 And then here's like Lake Chad. And you'll see this is like the size of Rhode Island here. Hold on. This is a freaking huge river. This is a very large river. And these lakes would have been bigger than the Great Lakes combined. But of course, they're not showing you everything. This is just what they have. So someone just superimposed this. They're not even showing you the what's it called again? I have this on a piece of paper somewhere in case I got confused and forgot it. There it is. The Terramesset. Is this it? No. The Terramesset. Yeah, so let's open that for a second. Come on. Okay. The Terramesset. Tamanrasset, also known as the Tamangasset or the Tamangast, is an oasis city and capital of the Tamanrasset province in Algeria. Well, it's right here. Site of nuclear test. Let me see. I have more tabs for that somewhere already. Is this it? Yeah, okay. So here's the Tamanrasset River, an enormous paleo river believed to have flowed through the West Africa as recently as 5,000 years ago. So, check that out. Here's Atlas up here, and here's Hogar. And you've got this river that went arguably through here, and another bathymetry shows river going down through here through Congo. So there's a saltwater flow that's coming all the way across the coast, but there's fresh water that's brought through the Tamanrasset. So the connections there, and it's emptying out. So there's huge amounts of water, and then along the way, salt is actually filtered out, which is why there's huge salt deposits in Africa. And this is all within human history, human memories of this existing. This is not so long ago that it's forgotten, which is interesting because people would say, "Oh, this is, 250,000 years ago." Well, we have, as recently as 5,000 years ago, et cetera. Like, no, there are people within, maybe the last 1,200 years that recall river systems that are flowing through here, and wadis at least. So again, wadi, water. Is that the right word? I hope I'm using the right water. There we go. Okay, so a wadi is an Arabic term referring to a valley. In some instances, it may refer to a wet riverbed that contains water only when heavy rain occurs. So there you go. So that's like what I actually meant when I was talking about that. It's funny that it refers to a valley because the reason it's a valley is because water, and this is, someone also could say this is a giant drilling technology, but it's amazing what water can do. Like water can, empty out an area. So we have examples of areas where water has flowed through Africa that people now are in. It's interesting. Look at some of these, crystalline rock formations that look kind of like something in Scotland you might have seen. These giant, look at how these things are growing. So that's very interesting also. So you see there's some fossilization of nature, and there's some symmetry, some resonant symmetry that's forming even. So that's cool. Wadis, randomly in the last 5,000 years, right, just randomly, nature started to change, and that's weird because we know this is interesting. We're told that this took millions of years at first, right? Everything took millions of years, and then it took thousands of years. Well, that's a big difference. But then how many thousands of years? Well, let me see if I can find my other paper. There. No, come back. This paper, I need this paper. You can't hide this paper. No way. Dude, that is messed up. They've removed the paper? This is crazy. Here we go. Come back. You can't be gone. There we go. Okay, it was a PDF file. Saved. Study shows Lake Megachad dried up far more quickly than we previously thought. This is not even a recent article, 2015. A trio of researchers from the University of London and King's College studying the history of Lake Chad has found that the lake was reduced to its current size very quickly just 1,000 years ago. See, the thing about me, and this is why, I can't help it, I have to say this, is I'm not countercultural. I deal with these people that are fighting against stuff they just don't know is currently the mainstream. I think I might accidentally be the most mainstream person I know. I just happen to know this, the most recent study. And, you're dealing with people that are fighting for, what they believe in, which is what they were taught in third grade in 1976. Like, okay, just had to say that. So 1,000 years ago, and again, by the way, one more thing, 1,000 years ago would have been the end of the river system and the Mega Chad Lake system, but not necessarily the wadis, which are the valleys that have water flowing then. So what we have then is into 100 years ago, you have wadis where every once in a while flash floods occur. Okay, so in their paper published in the Proceedings of National Academy of Sciences, Simon Armitage, Charlie Bristow, and Nick Drake described how they conducted a reconstructed lake-level history for the ancient Lake Mega Chad and what they found by doing so. For many years, earth scientists have theorized that the remains of Lake Mega Chad, a huge lake that once existed where Lake Chad now sits in Central Africa, on the borders of Nigeria, Chad, Cameroon, and Niger, provide the fertilizer for the Amazonian rainforest, thousands of miles away in South America. Without a constant infusion of nutrients, the lush vegetation would disappear because nutrients are washed away by the constant rainfall. That's why the Amazon's red. This new study of the Lake Mega Chad now casts some doubt on that theory. By studying the geography of Lake Chad and the areas surrounding it using satellite imagery to make out ancient shorelines, an area that was once covered by water, the Bodeli Basin, researchers found that the region underwent a drying spell some 5,000 years ago that lasted to this day. Prior to that, the area had been humid with lots of rain, which fed Lake Mega Chad, the largest lake in the world at that time. But then something happened and the rains began to slow, which caused the lake to shrink rapidly just 1,000 years ago, much more recently than has been thought. When the lake shrank, it left behind thousands of years of silt deposits which dried up and formed sand dunes, which has been carried by the wind, perhaps all the way to South America, but only for the last 1,000 years, which begs the question, where was the Amazon basin getting its fertilizer before that time? Or does it mean that the fertilizer and the dust from the former Lake Mega Chad simply falls into the ocean, implying that the Amazon basin has been getting its fertilizer from somewhere else all along? Well, that's also true because the Atlantic has its own source of nutrients that can flow into the Amazon. I do think that the orange color probably does come from the Sahara. Well, okay, so that's interesting right there. The idea that this is interesting. That everything happened a lot more recently than people think. Here are the lakes. There was another thing I wanted to show you. Salton Sea. Where's my Google Map thing? Don't tell me I closed my Google Maps. I did it again. Okay. We're trying this one more time. Giza. So, the reason why I'm showing you Giza again, the distance here is not very far, and you'd think, big deal, right? Like, this is just this little... Oh, wait. Thanks. Pardon me. That was a little further. Okay, yeah, so it's still pretty far. This is like, 40, I think it's 46 kilometers. It might be, 20 miles or something. I don't... Actually, it looks more like it's about 10 miles. It might only be 10 miles, but I think it's further because they didn't do it straight across. They did it up to Velika Svinga. Interesting name for a pyramid. That must be something else. They can't be right. Really? Okay, well then that's interesting too. Start seeing some of these weird Egyptian places around the area, crosses and whatnot. So the point is, why am I telling you this? Why does this matter? Well, the water the fresh water that was diverted to make it possible for water to spin around the pyramids. See, there's water paths you can actually see. They went all the way down, and then even to go around the Great Sphinx, because again, there's these huge water paths and pyramids, water. Let me see if I can in Sphinx. Well, there we go. And here's a picture of the guys, and everyone hates it when I show this because they're like, no, they were aliens or something, or they had to be giants as opposed to slaves that are small enough to get into the tight crevices of the working building. Okay, anyway, these guys could have been dwarves, as far as we know. But you wrap these things in papyrus, they move them along, and then they can stack up. But the problem is when the water is flowing through here. Let me get to the page about the flooding of the Nile. Let me go back to show you that one more time, just because the obvious is coming. The obvious is coming. The retaining wall to hold the water, right? Okay. So, the flooding of the Nile. The flooding of the Nile has been an important natural cycle in Egypt since ancient times. It is celebrated by Egyptians as the annual holiday for 2 weeks, starting August 15th. Okay, and that's another important thing about the Gregorian calendar, because really, it's something more like August 12th, I think it is. And it's a holiday called the Wafa el Nil, the celebration of the Nile, And what I was taught in school, I think even, maybe it was before school, because I was like 6 years old, was that some of the more variable equations of algebra were some of the earlier ideas of variable equations were designed to calculate the flood seasons of the Nile, because the Nile would flood every year, or pretty much often, up until maybe the last couple hundred years, right? So what happened? Okay. Celebrating the Coptic church ceremony, throwing a martyr's relic into the river, hence the name the martyr's finger in Coptic. The flooding of the Nile was poetically described in myths as Isis' tears of sorrow for Osiris when killed by their brother Set. The flooding of the Nile is the result of the yearly monsoon. Okay, and a monsoon is a traditional seasonal reversing wind accompanied by corresponding changes in precipitation. This can also bring bugs and frogs and things like that. May and August causing enormous precipitation on the Ethiopian highlands, whose summit reached heights of up to 4,550 meters. Most of the rainfall is taken by the Blue Nile and by the Atbara River, also known as the Black Nile, which, while a less important amount flows through the Sobat and the White Nile into the Nile. Okay, so important to understand, this is a huge amount of water. Typical heights of floods were 45 feet. Okay, 38 feet at Aswan, at Luxor, and 25 feet in Cairo. So these are very large floods, and flooding would reach Aswan about a week earlier than Cairo, and then 5 to 6 days earlier in Luxor. So the flooding was, you could do math to figure out when it was coming based on other things. So this is very important. In agriculture and math about agriculture, we have ample records of people trying to figure out, and this is something that would be kind of weird to fake, to be honest, math equations for how the heck are we going to deal with this weather? How bad is it? How bad is this flood? It's so bad. It's 45 feet by a volume of whatever amount of water. How can we get rid of it? So perennial irrigation starts to happen, and they start to perennial irrigation that they're talking about in the 18th century is really based on older irrigation, basin irrigation. And interestingly enough, they always say it was 7,000 years ago, or a million. Humans don't want to take the blame for something that's happened more recently. What's the Nilometer? The Nilometer was a structure for measuring the Nile's river clarity and water level during the annual flood season. There were 3 main types of Nilometers, calibrated in Egyptian cubits: a vertical column, a corridor stairway of steps leading down to the Nile, or a deep well with a culvert. If the water level was low, there would be less food. If it was high, it would be destructive. So here you get people calculating how much food there's going to be for their populations, which are growing. And, it's really interesting. This is not just people discovering giants' technology all the time. in certain circumstances, you have people literally just like, what are we going to do about the fact that we have these assets and we have to manage them? And that's a whole other story that's very important. People that were figuring out, I mean, in the Old West, how did they get through it? How did people run the trains, right? There were humans involved. So, but that's where it gets dark. And here's where the problem starts, because some of this stuff, obviously, more ancient, more beautiful, and poorly managed by humans trying to figure out what to do with it. So, flooding of the Nile one year. And again, here's this thing I was trying to show you, the flotation chamber idea. Papyrus reeds, the water causeway, pushed under. They're essentially weightless, and then it just floats up. And so it's interesting, and it's a plausible theory. But if the weather is bad, and all of a sudden the water can't divert there, let me see, also kind of do Mega Chad river systems. These river systems, like, where's the water going to flow? So all of a sudden the water that's flowing in these different places, if there's no way for them to reach the Lake Chad or to reach the Congo or anything like that, because the water is now, again, it's diverted. Pyramids, water, again. The water is now diverted to being around these buildings. What ends up happening? Well, the water then pours over this. And then what happens after that? Well, then the water ends up completely absorbing into the area, and you have major flooding. Okay, major flooding. And at first you have stagnation. I mean, well, actually, you have some amount of just crazy water flow for a little while, but this wouldn't be quite as bad looking as it. But it could be. It could be literally this much water flows in after a flood, because you have to imagine there's no place for the water to go, and it's in, we call it the Valley of the Kings, right? There's places like that are just, there's places for the water to flow up until it ends and if the Mega Chad's no longer connected to these areas, we have to go look at that at some point. I'm just very interested. But what happened was essentially a major flood that led to major stagnation and swamp. And so you've got, first off, the reverse flow. You've got a warning that the flood's coming, because you have all these animals. You have flies and maggots that are growing in this pond. Before that, you have frogs. And before that, they're coming to eat the locusts. Locusts are flying with the wind. So it starts out very much like the plagues. You hear that someone's building this temple to this god. It's really important to build, or whatever it is. But they're taking a factory, right? And this is the other thing, like the idea that the pyramids were tombs is still absurd, and these are power plant factories. But they're just not quite as hippie as people think. There really are important factories. There really is electricity being produced because of water that's being cycled into this area. And they're thinking that they can do this great thing for nature, right? And it's going to be very helpful. But what ends up happening is they cut off the river system, and they start an ecological feedback loop that destroys everything. Now, really quickly, I want to show you some examples again of that. The Aral Sea and the Salton Sea. So one example is the Salton Sea. It's the largest landlocked high saline body of water. It's the largest lake in California. It's a saline lake. The lake was formed from an inflow of water from the Colorado River in 1905. Okay, biggest lake in California, created in 1905. So it's a very recent lake. Beginning in the 1900s, an irrigation canal was dug from the Colorado River to the old Alamo River channel, which means that it doesn't exist anymore probably, and to provide water to the Imperial Valley for farming. The hedgers and canals sustained a building of silt, so a series of cuts were made in the bank of the Colorado River to further increase the water flow. Water from spring floods broke through the canal head gate, diverting a portion of the river flow into the Salton Basin for 2 years before repairs were completed. The water in the formation dry lake bed created the modern lake, which is about 15 by 35 miles. The lake would have dried up, but farmers used generous amounts of Colorado River water and let the excess flow into the lake. In the 1950s and 1960s, the area became a resort destination. And okay, this is an example of a fabricated lake that's been allowed to exist. Then here's the Aral Sea. Again, 1989, biggest lake in Russia, right? In 2014, nothing left, almost nothing left. And in 20 years, there will be nothing left. Like, this will be gone. And the way this happens is a thing called ecological feedback loops. I wanted to show you, where's my ecological feedback loops page? Oh dear. I know it exists somewhere. There we go. Earth How. That's got to be 15 climate. I know this page is open somewhere else too, is the irony here. Oh, I found it. It's over here. Okay, 15 climate feedback loop examples. The cascading effects of climate change can have unforeseen consequences. And this is fun because I know people are like, climate change doesn't exist, blah, 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 blah. Well, okay. I mean, there's a reason why they stopped calling it global warming so they could call it climate change. Because climate change does exist day to day, every day. It's hot and cold throughout the day, even, you know. But there's climate change even on a there are seasons, right? So it's summer and there's spring, you know, through the year. And yeah, climate will change over a 19-year period. As another thing that we were learning about, because, like, you know, you was talking about 19. I found the Jewish calendar synchronizes its lunar calendar to the solar calendar every 19 years, because you have a 260-day calendar for the lunar calendar, but the solar calendar is necessary for seasons, and that takes 19 years. You have 11 days missing every time they try to fix it, and you end up with a 19-year system. So, but in terms of feedback loops, positive feedback loops and a positive feedback loop initial warning triggers a feedback loop to blah, 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 blah. Who cares? I'm just going to show it to you. Let's just circulation, right? Water accumulation, wind redistribution, ocean circulation, heat, melt and runoff. Okay, so some of that water goes over to the land, some of that water goes out to the sea, some of that sea salt keeps the fresh water frozen on top. It precipitates, evaporates and precipitates into a cyclic loop of feedback that, if it stops happening, the change it amplifies the change. So if you've got a cloud that's raining down, hold on. Ice sheets, these are just different examples. High rainfall for more moisture in the atmosphere. There's another one I'm trying to find. Net primary productivity increase. A higher concentration of CO2 enters the atmosphere. Plants have more material to photosynthesize. If you isolate a single plant in a laboratory, then adding CO2 makes air greener for now, but this fertilization effect diminishes with time. Plants can't grow indefinitely with rising CO2. This is because plants require a lot of other factors like nitrogen in the nutrient cycle. And if temperature rises, this can negatively influence plant growth. All right, but more importantly, anywhere where there's like a rainforest right now is probably like a major city or something. That's a CO2 factory production area. And so that's an interesting thing about the Amazon, is probably, maybe that's older than, that could be like 10,000 years. Who knows? Like these ancient forests that are supposed to be, Malaysia is supposed to be 3 million years old. Some of those places could be several resets old. And the fertilization effect, even though it diminishes with time, if it's too much CO2, the amount of CO2 that there is, it's pretty indicative of the oxygen producing plants have been put there to clean up something that's happened. Black body radiation, chemical weathering as carbon dioxide sink, the pump, lapse rate. There's some example positive climate feedback loops. There are examples where permafrost melt sparks methane release, but the main idea is, if the water doesn't land where it needs to go, then it can't rain back into the lake. And so eventually that's a big issue. And if the water gets diverted and ends up flowing away, you end up drying up a place. That's how Bakersfield happened too. We don't even think about Bakersfield, ancient lake. But there was an ancient lake in Bakersfield. Lake Corcoran was a ancient lake that covered the Central Valley of California. It existed of the Sacramento River and the Joaquin Valley. An alternate view presumes the lake covered only the southern parts of the Central Valley. The total covered area 30 to 50,000 square kilometers. Buena Vista Lake, Kern Lake, and Tulare Lake are remnants of Lake Corcoran. The lake is the source of the Corcoran clay, a lacustrine unit of Tulare and Turlock Lake formations. It also influenced sedimentation of the coast of California. supposedly existed like forever ago, but clay deposits say more recently, and then people start to admit this thing probably existed really, really recently, like within the last 1,000 years. The lake originally drained into Monterey Bay via the Salinas River, or at one time not at all, or doesn't at all. The evaporation from this lake was a source of water for the Sierra Nevada and in lesser measures for the Basin Range province behind it. It contributed to the formation of large pluvial lakes in Nevada. So, I mean, this is, again, we didn't do it. It was just naturally that this all happened. But so feedback loops start to happen. And then in Egypt, you see these other things, right? They're like, well, millions of years ago, there's the Valley of the Whales. There's these in the middle of the desert. And there's all these excuses that are just the most harebrained excuses, that there were earthquakes that pushed the bones up to the surface or something, or, and you could say, hey, someone just put them there, like, right? But no, you have examples of water that were flowing through here and things that got lost. And this happens in California, like Beached Whale River, Sacramento. Let me just show you this too. If you think it's so unlikely that a whale will beach itself, this happens all the time. It sucks, but whales will beach themselves by accident. And the Sacramento River, man, a whale. This is a weird one. The erratic humpback whale, 1985 Odyssey through the Sacramento Delta River, captured widespread attention. Fought for his life Monday after beaching himself in San Francisco Bay. It's so sad. But people this was like a huge thing. Oh, there's a whale. There's a whale in the Sacramento River. Everybody, we have to turn him around. And they were trying to turn this whale around and get him back to the sea. It's just like, I don't know what the heck, man. That was just crazy. But that's my youth. So anyway, whales that get beached. It happens. Doesn't have to be millions of years ago. Another thing is the idea that this is supposed to show us proof in evolutionary definitive terms that whales started out land animals that look like giant pigs. They were just big pig things. But now they've evolved into whales. I mean, okay, what do you think about that? Whales, fingers, skeleton. Obviously, whales have all the potential. There are men in whales' bodies. You know what I mean? Like they've got, look at this. This is a whale's hand. So it's one of those things, because some people are like, oh, I hate evolution. I'm like, okay, yeah, but what about, over a few generations, traits, like your grandparents' traits? Like do you believe in evolution in the sense that your kids can inherit your grandparents' traits? And they're like, well, no, but yeah, my grandparents' trait, yeah, that'd be great. My baby's like my daddy. But yeah, okay. So microevolution, like, what do you want to call it? Like, what do you want to admit to? And then with this, what are you saying? Like, the whale needed to have fingers? I mean, this is nuts. Like, this thing is really inside of a whale. And, yeah, I mean, you don't even see it most of the time. It's just, unless you cut it open. Like, look at this guy. Look at this guy. That's ridiculous. Little cute hands. Adorable. Little fingers. So, I don't know. Was he just built that way? That could be. Could be. But, yeah, there's a lot of evidence, because there are related animals which they've found that they say, well, this is just a clear progression from when they used to come here a million years earlier. And then they came back there a million years later. But now they've become predators. I don't know. So there's something to that. It's interesting to look into the evolution of whales. And the idea that they were land animals that went back to sea. I can't wait to hear somebody yell at me for even bringing that up from a Wikipedia page. But the other thing is, how long did this take, right? Water coming through, millions of years. Well, dude, like, seriously, like, erosion, rapid. Let me see if I can find anything on rapid erosion. Erosion's very rapid. In Santa Cruz, if the water is hitting this every day and they don't have these pipes and concrete and everything holding this thing together, then every day a giant chunk of wall will just rock. It'll go away like an ice sheet on in Antarctica. So no, the idea that erosion's, and then also what happens to it? Well, the water then salutes into it and it carries it off in mud. So yeah, mud floods are the response to major amounts of water. And then Let's also, I just saw a video on this. I wonder if I can get away with playing this. Hold on, let me look for this really quickly. What was it? It was the Sahara desert flood, I think is what it was, right? What is that channel? I might not be able to find it. Oh, is this the Desert Valley? Is this the right one? What is it? Desert flood. Is it California? I think it was. Well, yeah. Flash flood making up. I'm gonna see if I can get this to work. Okay, so hopefully I don't get in trouble for showing Kelly Bishop's video, and I appreciate that they did this. Just to show you guys, though, you get first off, there's the craziest diverse extremophile life living in deserts. That's the most important thing to know, is that because nothing else is there, the things that are there are the most interesting. Then, because it's not used to saturating rock, eventually you get sand sediment because it doesn't saturate, and the flood starts to happen very quickly. A flash flood could take literally just an hour in a desert because it's just unusual. And when it starts to happen, it goes to the places of most recent flow. So here's an example of how quickly an area will become flooded. It would just be in one day, an area just completely turns into this. And, I think we've talked about this before, mud floods and the deluge, the idea of how this could happen from shattered ice caps, volcanoes, technically meteors, but we'll show you something else related to that in a second as well. It's just, you start to see this idea that like major environmental shifts, when they happen, are not over gradual periods of time. They're very quick. When something happens, this was an hour ago, now you've got it carried off miles, right? This very quickly, the rocks that were in one place are carried off miles. They're moving faster than sharks. And it's much more impressive than people realize. Now, this dirt that's being carried down, the sediment, is hitting this rock, okay? So now you have a constant flow of pressure with sediment. It's sandpaper. It's watered sandpaper kept cool. So these kinds of things can happen. It's important to understand. I wanted to show you. Oh, this is a little further along. Let me see. Let's start with this. No. Too deep, bro. Too deep. We're going to get there in a second. The Sahara Sea. Okay, so now we know this idea that there was maybe a Sahara Sea. This idea that there could have been water. We have proof of the Mega Chad. We now know, according to the physics.org, that in a lot of physics papers will tell you that within the last 1,000 years, really, not 5,000 years, not 100,000 years, 1,000 years. Okay. And then that was just when it was flowing constantly. That there's been times since then, even into the last 100 years, where we call them wadis. Until even now, we're not going to call wadis what they are. We're going to call them valleys. When they used to be flood zones. It used to mean water comes through here, and this is a great place to get water if you're in the middle of the desert. And before that, it meant, rivers, because that was where the Sahara River was. Okay. And what about fixing it? It looks like humans did this. It looks like humans diverted water in Giza. At the time that you've got the story of Moses and Akhenaten being, it's the 13th century on either side, right? And you've got Akhenaten and Moses. Now, I'll just, because maybe you got some new people that haven't seen this yet. I'm just going to rub it in again. Moses is thought to be 13th century, corresponding to 1391 to 1271. Remember, he's supposed to live for like 140 years, okay? Akhenaten is supposed to be 1351 to 1336, okay? So literally the same time period. He's, Akhenaten's a little younger. He doesn't die at 140, but Moses would be 30 at the time that Akhenaten's reigning. So it's perfect timing. And you have this idea that there was there's this flood. It's carrying with it famines. There's plagues. You've got the bugs, locusts, and frogs. And then when the water settles, you get a swamp. And so the swamping lagoon area, until it saturates into the rock around it and disappears, you've got this mud that's everywhere and swamp. And the whole area is just completely destroyed. So what do we do about it? Is anybody ever going to try to fix the megachad and try to bring the megachad back? Well, the Sahara Sea is a project that's been existing since the 19th century and probably longer. So that gives you some idea. They say the 19th century, they've been trying to build a sea in the Sahara ever since the 19th century. So there's your clue. The Sahara Sea was the name of a hypothesis, by the way. This is not, I want to make this clear. 21st century, regain steam. The Sahara Sea is the name of a hypothetical macroengineering project which proposed flooding endorheic basins in the Sahara Desert with water from the Atlantic Ocean or Mediterranean Sea. The goal of this unrealized project is to create an inland sea that would cover the substantial area of the Sahara Desert, which lie below sea level, bringing humid air, rain, and agriculture deep into the desert. The possibility of such a project was raised several times by different scientists and engineers during the late 19th century and early 20th century, primarily from European colonial powers in Africa. The concept of, and that means France, but Germany too. But it was, I'll show you something really, really hilarious called Atlantropa. But during the late 19th century and early 20th century, primarily from European colonial powers in Africa, the concept of flooding the Sahara was also featured in novels of the time. Yes, Jules Verne's last novel is about the Sahara Sea, something that I'll have to bring up in a minute. But Donald Mackenzie, whom does not have a Wikipedia page, but don't let that scare you, because you can just take his name and you can type it into the internet. Now, I know it's a little bit more dangerous, but if you type in Sahara Sea next to his name in DuckDuckGo, you'll be able to find World Atlas Project, Sahara Overland Project. There's a lot more than you might realize on this guy. Cape Juby, one of the first places to propose to create the Sahara Sea. Yeah, don't worry. There's a lot more that you can find out. Mackenzie's factory. Here's a picture of Mackenzie. Look at the guys. They just look like they're from the Elephant Bar, And these are the dudes you want to hang out with. In Timbuktu, knew a bunch of stuff, wrote a bunch of things down. You're gonna want to look into Mackenzie. He's very important. So just because he doesn't have a Wikipedia page, that doesn't mean you shouldn't look into him. Okay. First to propose creating the Sahara Sea, Mackenzie's idea was to cut a channel from one of the sandbarred lagoons north of Cape Juby, south to the large plain which Arab traders had identified to him as El Juf. Mackenzie believed the vast region was up to 61 meters, 200 feet below sea level, and that flooding it would create an inland sea of about 155,400 square kilometers, or 60,000 square miles, suited to commercial navigation and even agriculture. I think everybody knows, I don't even have to really show you, that seashore property is worth more than desert property. Anyway, below sea level, he further believed the geological evidence suggested that his basin had once been connected to the Atlantic via a channel near the Segué El Hamra. Okay, so everybody knew this. Everybody knew that this was a very recent change, and that it was up until the 19th century that they were convincing people. So it's just really, it's crazy. It's crazy. They're telling you, no, millions of years ago. It's like, okay. He proposed that the inland sea, if augmented with the canal, could provide access to the Niger River and the markets and rich resources of West Africa. There are several small depressions in the vicinity of Cape Juby at 55 meters below sea level. The Sebkas Ta is the lowest and largest at 55 meters below sea level. That's gnarly. Okay, but it covers less than 250 kilometers square and is 500 kilometers north of the geographical area identified as El Juf, which is an average elevation of 320 meters above sea level. Mackenzie never traveled in this area, but had read of other sub-Sahara level desert basins in present-day Tunisia, Algeria, and Egypt. Similarly to those found near Cape Juby. These basins contain seasonally dry salt lakes known as chauts or sebkas. Francois-Elie Roudier, a French geographer, and Ferdinand de Lesseps, a diplomat influential in the creation of the Suez Canal, proposed this area for the creation of an inland sea in 1878. Okay, the Suez Canal. And you guys remember when we were looking at the Suez Canal before, we found that there was a more ancient canal. You just type in ancient with anything these days. It seems like it's kind of the code word. Was there an ancient Suez Canal near the monolithic period, near the east 5,000 years ago? Different sources. First attempts, Greek canal projects during the late 640 BC. No, this is not the right article. But yes, there is. There are pictures of a Suez Canal further up the coast of the Suez Canal. Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, I mean, so you'll find the Canal of the Pharaohs. I think that's the original Suez Canal, right? So there are more examples of these canals. And when you look into ancient canals, and we'll do that another time because I got to get through this for you guys, but because I got like 100 new tabs open, I'll never get you guys anywhere. Okay. Roudier and Lesseps proposed this channel would be cut from the Gulf of Gabes in the Mediterranean to the Chott de Fegege, or whatever. I think it's Fegege. Where did I put that? Gulf of Gabes. There we go. The Gulf of Gabes. Lesser Syrtis. Yeah, that's right. Contrasting with the Greek Syrtis in Libya. Yeah. The Gulf of Sidra, otherwise known as the Gulf of Syrtis, is a gulf of Tunisia's east coast in the Mediterranean Sea off North Africa. The Gulf tides have a large range up to 2.1 meters in spring tides. Both Gabes and Sfax are major ports on the Gulf, supporting sponge and tuna fisheries, with Gabe being the economic and administrative center. So you're going to want to know. Latin name Syrtis Minor is used for Pliny the Elder. Interesting that Syrtis Minor was Pliny the Elder. Okay. To compare Syrtis Major, the ancient name of the Gulf of Sidra. Okay, the Lotus Eaters. Syrtis of the Lotus Eaters. Right? Syrtis is referred to in the New Testament of the Bible, where the Apostle Paul relates being sent in chains to Rome to stand trial before Caesar Nero. The crew of his ship worry about being driven by a storm into Syrtis, and took precautions to prevent it, resulting eventually in being shipwrecked on the island of Malta in the Mediterranean Sea. Strabo refers to Cape, the modern Gabes, as an important entrepot of the Lesser Syrtis. In Book 4 of the Histories, Herodotus describes a violent ritual that took place in the region. During a festival dedicated to the goddess Athena, their young women divided into two camps and then set them fighting up. Guys, if you want to go in here and edit this to have an X, go right ahead. A modern counterpart to this festival of violence involving two opposing gangs near the Shat al-Jarid, annually engaged in combat with stones and clubs described. Okay, well, you get a little bit there that matters. Gulf of Sidra. Save it for another time, but there's some interesting Syrtis history there. Okay. They were optimistic about their weather effects that such an inland sea would produce in Europe. Others were not so hopeful. Alexander William Mitchinson argued that flooding substantial areas would create disease-ridden swamps. Others were critical of the feasibility of the project or the proposal to join the sea at El Juf with the sea that is now in Tunisia and Algeria. The project was ultimately rejected by the French government and funding was withdrawn when surveys revealed that many areas were not below sea level as had been believed. But then, in the 20th century, proposals to create a Sahara Sea were revived by French professor Edmond Echgoyen. So it's interesting that these are again red named. They don't have articles on Wikipedia about some of the most important people in history. Echgoyen proposed that a longer and deeper canal could be constructed. He argued that such a sea could be a boon for colonization and could potentially produce an inland sea half the size of the Mediterranean. The proposal was considered by the French government, but was also rejected. Critics noted that some parts of the Sahara Desert were indeed below sea level, much of the Sahara was above sea level, blah, blah, blah. Proposal similar to Ruder, unless this was developed by a member of the Operation Plowshare. Okay, are y'all ready for Operation Plowshare? Because I've been meaning to read you about this article, and I was like, dude, too soon, bro. Calm down. These people aren't ready. Project Plowshare was an overall United States program for the development of techniques to use nuclear explosives for peaceful construction processes. Okay, so and also, just so you guys know, you can get the video from Prelinger Archives on the YouTube. And I don't know how they're going to be about me showing you a couple little photos of it. But, energy of TNT versus energy of, explosions. And they're saying we're going to turn our weapons into plowshares. Get it? Pounding our swords into plowshares. So, very important video about making giant holes to make canals in Egypt. Okay? That's what that video is about. And that's what this project was. Project Plowshare was to undermine the Soviet Union by using atoms for peace, right? Part of the worldwide Atoms for Peace movement. So 1953, Atoms for Peace. I feel impelled to speak today in a language that in a sense is new, one which I, who have spent so much of my life in the military profession, would have preferred never to use. That new language is the language of atomic warfare. So, Atoms for Peace program, trying to make atomic energy seem peaceful. You can imagine how crazy this time is, right? Because Eisenhower, and Eisenhower's daughter or granddaughter, she's like abducted by UFOs person. UFOs. Let's see. Is it daughter? Laura Eisenhower says she was recruited for space program. Notorious UFO community. And there's a whole thing with, there's a lot to this, actually. Regardless of what you believe about flat earth or space, like Laura Eisenhower is definitely some crazy stuff going on here. You got to know more about that. I'm going to leave it for another time because that's not my most important subject, but suffice it to say, the project's uncharacteristically large and atmospherically vented Sudan nuclear test also led geologists to determine that the Barringer crater was a result of a meteor impact and not from a volcanic eruption as had been earlier assumed, right? Which is just very interesting because that later was disproven and shown to be actually from a volcano, from a super volcano. There's a lot of evidence that this was not from a meteor, and this is from a super volcano. But not that there was necessarily... The thing is, it's not that something erupted out of this hole. It's literally that something landed here. Because something was a projectile out of a super volcano. And we have proof of this now since, I think, 2015. But here's your example of the largest meteorite, the Holstein meteorite. Well, it's a piece of iron. Projected from, and you've got the blast zone as well. So there's a lot of examples of that we can go into, but I'm gonna go back. Oh yeah, and also the Sudan nuclear test was a shallow underground nuclear test conducted in Area 10 of the Yucca Flats in Nevada, as part of Operation Plowshare, a program to investigate the use of nuclear weapons for mining, cratering, and other civilian purposes. The radioactive fallout from the test contaminated more U.S. residents than any other nuclear test. The Sudan crater is the largest human-made crater in the United States and is listed on the National Register of Historic Places. Here's the Sudan crater. Everybody living in Nevada has been around the radiation poisoning, if that's a real thing. Because it's also, the funny thing is the oil companies made it sound like it was a way more dangerous poisoning. Right? It's poisoning, but it's not necessarily as bad as you think it is. We'll get into that another time. But thermonuclear device with a fission yield of more than 30% and a fusion yield of about 70%. Big a kaboom. Fallout across America. Big zones of fallout. Sucks to be in parts of Zion now, and in Nevada. And, whoa. That's crazy. Crazy. What happened there, man? It's horrible. That's Dakotas. The Dakotas are just, come on. How is that possible? That seems like there's something crazy going on there. And also, look at, there's some fallout over there too. Okay, well, you've seen that one. The point is that they were going to do that in Africa to make a giant sea, and they had proposals of widening the Panama Canal with nukes, and Project Carrywall in 63 by the Atomic Energy Commission, the California Division of Highway, now Caltrans, and Santa Fe would have used 22 nuclear explosions to excavate a massive road cut through the Bristol Mountains in the Mojave Desert to accommodate construction of Interstate 40 and a new rail line. A project proposed in 1963 memorandum by Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory would have used 522 megaton nuclear explosions to excavate a canal through the Negev Desert in Israel at an estimated cost of $575 million. So, I mean, the idea of nuking all these ancient sites was very popular at this time. And when you start to look into why they didn't do it, why didn't they do it? Is it just because of the anti-radiation propaganda? Did they realize that it was a bad idea? They were going to lose actual ancient ruins along the way? What was the reason? Well, one of the things you'll find is they did do it. It's just that the American government sold it to the French government. And so the French government did Gerbois Bleu. It was conducted by the Nuclear Experiments Operational Group Goen, a unit of the Joint Special Weapons Command, on February 13, 1960, at the Sahara Military Experience Center near Rajon, French Algeria, in the Sahara Desert region of Tanzaruf during the Algerian War. So we talked about the Algerian War a couple weeks ago, and it's an important thing. The Algerian War of Algiers, I think, is the movie, and I've recommended it then. I'll recommend it again now. Film 1960, whatever. Battle of Algiers, right? The Battle of Algiers. Great movie. Teaches you a lot about the French colonialism in Africa and what they were trying to do. And it's not really anti-French. It's not really pro-Algerian, but it is kind of anti-French and pro-Algerian. I think it's more pro-French, pro-Algerian. But it's one of those things where they're like, if you think about America versus Britain, and people are like, how could the Americans fight with the British? That's kind of what this movie says to me. It's about Francophiles around the world, and the idea that you can be an Islamic Francophile, as opposed, and this is like the Afro-Asia, kind of idea, that there really are other aspects to culture than the European continental culture. Anyway, they blew up a nuclear bomb. And it was in order to test, the father of the A-bomb. So, papa. Gerbois is the French word for gerbois, a desert rodent found in Sahara. 1958 April, Felix Gaillard ordered a nuclear test in the first quarter of 1960. Charles de Gaulle reaffirmed the decision. So the plutonium-filled bomb was detonated atop a steel tower with an altitude of 100 meters. The command post was located 16 kilometers away from the blast. In order to study the immediate effects, military equipment was placed at varying distances from the epicenter, while jets flew overhead to take samples of radioactive particles. No journalists were allowed on the site. Instead, an eyewitness account was given to the French press, saying that the desert was lit up by a vast flash, following 45 seconds later by an appreciable shock wave. An enormous ball of bluish fire with an orange-red center gave way to the typical mushroom cloud. France became the fourth nuclear power after the United States, Soviet Union, and the United Kingdom. Prior to this test, there had been no nuclear detonations for 15 months. Gerbois Bleu was by far the largest first test bomb up to that date, larger than the American Trinity, the Soviet RDS, or the British Hurricane, which were all 20, 22, 25 kilotons. The yield was 70 kilotons on the Gerbois. So, bigger than these three bombs put together. In comparison, Fat Man, the Nagasaki bomb, was 22 kilotons, one-third as powerful. As the atomic yield of a new bomb design cannot be precisely predicted, the French army planned an explosion between 60 and 70 kilotons. Gerbois Bleu was a total success, yielding the full designed power. However, because of the bomb's irregularly high yield, some experts believe that the bomb may have been overfilled with plutonium to assure success. Only two other A-bombs tested in the Sahara facilitated were more powerful: the Rubis, 100 kilotons in 1963, and the Safer, 150 kilotons in 1965. Both were detonated underground. at the In Eiker facility is something that we'll have to look up later. So the point is, there were nuclear explosions across Africa, crazy fallout, decades. Documentation of the Groix test remained heavily classified by the French government. The Ministry of Armed Forces has maintained that the radioactive effects on humans present at the site would be weak and well below annual doses. However, persons present at the site have since stated that the protection gear was extremely minimal. And at the time of testing, in addition, ex-military officers have come forward with stories of being used as test subjects to study the effects of nuclear radiation on humans. Immediately following the explosion of Groix Verte, which yielded 1 kiloton, soldiers were sent within a 1 kilometer radius of the explosion site, where they practiced combat exercises and drove tanks around the area. In total, these subjects were exposed to high levels of radiation for 3 hours. Following the exercises, the soldiers state they were given showers as the only means of decontamination. So, there's been subsequent tests after the Alger War, but that was just something I wanted to bring up just so people understand the French nuclear test, 13 underground nuclear tests, and 5 atmospheric nuclear tests by France between November 1961 and February 1966. I mean, dude, so underground tests, Africa, by France. Come on. Anybody? This is important stuff. And when you start to see like 13, like what were they drilling? What were they drilling under Africa, right? And are they contaminating the water sources, or do they think it's safe? I mean, it's some interesting questions to ask yourself. Okay. Well, and now we see Invasion of the Sea. I think it's all the way over here. Invasion of the Sea. L'Invasion de la Mer is an adventure novel written by Jules Verne. It was published in 1905, the last to be published in the author's lifetime, and described the exploits of Berber nomads and the European travelers in the Sahara in Africa. So, if we recall Berbers or Tartars, it's the same thing. European characters arrived to study the feasibility of flooding a low-lying region of the Sahara Desert to create an inland sea and open up the interior of the North African to trade. In the end, however, protagonist's pride in humanity potential to control and reshape the world is humbled by a cataclysmic earthquake, which results in the natural formation of just such a sea. Beautiful. Not only is this a great story, it's true, and backwards at the same time. So let's read that again in case I said too fast. The European characters arrived to study the feasibility of flooding a low-lying region of the Sahara Desert to create an inland sea and open up the interior of northern Africa to trade. In the end, however, the protagonist's pride in humanity and potential to control and reshape the world is humbled by a cataclysmic earthquake, which results in the natural formation of just such a sea. The same thing they wanted to happen happened naturally. And it's because it was already there. So, Invasion of the Sea takes place in the future 1930s, and this book is written in 1905. They got to make this into a movie or a video game or something. Follows the story of the European engineers and their military escorts who seek to revive an actual 19th century proposal to flood the Sahara Desert with waters from the Mediterranean Sea to create an inland Sahara Sea for both commercial and military purposes. The French military escort led by Captain Hardigan met with conflict from the Tuareg, again with Berber tribes who fear the new sea will threaten their nomadic way of life. The Berber tribes, led by the warlord Hajar, begin their insurgency campaign against the Europeans in an effort to derail their plans for the inland sea. Captain Hardigan attempts to retaliate against the Berbers and bring Hajar to justice. Ultimately, however, a disastrous earthquake strikes. This earthquake floods the Sahara to an extent beyond even the limits which were proposed by the Europeans and drowned the insurgent Tuaregs. Brutal. The novel Invasion of the Sea, as well as plans for characters in the novel, are inspired by real-life exploits of Captain Francois L.A. Rouder. Rouder was a French military officer and geographer who surveyed parts of Tunisia in the late 1880s. He discovered that large areas of the Sahara Desert were below sea level and proposed building it. Some have also noted the inclusion of the Berber raiders who opposed the efforts of the European engineers and military officers is a foreshadowing of the growth of Islamic terrorism in the 1900s and 2000s. Part of the novel under the title Captain Hardizan was serialized in the American Weekly. Yeah. Okay. Well, the Mighty Orinoco, the Kip brothers. There's definitely some some things that people need to see in this book, but there's also some things that you should be concerned about: contemporary reviews and criticism, different opinions, anti-colonial themes for British and American audiences. Viewed in a mostly positive light, the 2001 translation by Edward Baxter, and most criticisms were directed towards the problems with the original work by Jules Verne. Criticized the character development with the exception of that an affable dog named Ace of Hearts. I've also described the plot as both disjointed and predictable, saying that the book is overwhelmed with a deluge of scientific facts. Brian Taves, the North American Jules Verne Society, praised the use of multiple perspectives in the narrative, both French and North American, and the novel's political sophistication. He criticized the novel, however, for a general lack of excitement. Okay, you get the point. There's a book, and it's about the flooding of the Nile. It's not even the first time someone's talked about that. Let's also talk about, there's another important project. Well, we can go a little deeper. Proposal for the Salton Sea, 40 meters. That's enough there. Harouge. Not yet. We'll get there in a second. We're almost there. Which one is this one? Super Volcanoes. Younger Lady. Serious Giant. Flooding of the Nile. We did this one already. Animals. Extreme animals of the desert. Sand vipers. Sahara silver ants. Death stalker scorpions. Desert crocodiles. Monitor lizards. Black-faced firefinches. African silverbills, just some of the most beautiful animals. Red-necked ostriches, very strange-looking beast. Hyrax, small, thickest herbivore mammal, thickset. African wild dogs, where dogs probably originate from, perhaps. Gazelles, dromedary camels and goats, which actually originally come from North America. Desert foxes. Saharan cheetahs. Addax antelope. Just in case you didn't read that magazine for kids about the rainforest, now you know. Extremophiles in extreme environments. And if you want to go deeper, this article from NCBI NLM will tell you everything you need to know from the National Institute of Health. Things that aren't being killed by other things will live longer. So things that are able to tangentially become more unique to survive will. And that kind of microevolution will happen. Okay. Straits of Gibraltar crossing. I told you before that Spain and Africa were close, but they are way closer than I even can believe. And I've stood here and there, and it's crazy. So someone ought to build a bridge. There's a tunnel already between these two places. Well, it's going to happen. Strait of Gibraltar crossing is the hypothetical bridge or tunnel spanning the Strait of Gibraltar, about 14 kilometers or 9 miles at its narrowest point, that would connect Europe and Africa. The government of Spain and Morocco appointed a joint committee to investigate the feasibility of linking the two continents in 1979, which resulted in a much broader Euromed transport project. In January 2021, it was reported the United Kingdom and Morocco would discuss building the crossing between Gibraltar and Tangiers. Now, again, remember that it's not Spain, it's Gibraltar. So Gibraltar is owned by Britain. And Britain is very open to Islam and to Africa and to, this will happen very quickly. Spain will have a road through Gibraltar, and it will be controlled by England. And England will have checkpoints. And every time I went to Gibraltar, you'd have to go through these checkpoints where the British government will check you out. And it's always fine, but they look at your passport and they check you out. It seems really weird. It's okay. I haven't dealt with that so often since South America. And then before that, it was really, Europe, I think 2001, they stopped all the checkpoints. 2003 or something. So I remember the last checkpoints of 2001 in Europe before the European Union made visa-free. Or just, open borders everywhere. So it's going to be weird going back to the British system of the British know you, who you are, and are watching you all the time. It's kind of terrifying. But, okay. That's going to happen. There's going to be a bridge. Various tunnels have been proposed. Planning, Cowie, Sistra. It'll happen very soon. Now, here's another macro engineering project. Atlantropa. Colonization idea that was devised by the German architect Hermann Sorgel. So this guy is a pretty weird Bavarian architect, and promoted until his death in 1952. So through the Reich, afterwards, he continued to demand this thing be done. So it's a great idea. The project was devised to contain several hydroelectric dams in key points of the Mediterranean Sea, such as the Strait of Gibraltar and the Bosphorus, to cause sea levels to drop and to create new land to settle. And so his idea was basically Venice would be filled. Like, this guy's nuts, dude. Look at this. Venice would be filled. Croatia would be destroyed. Rome is horrible. Horrible thing he would do. Istanbul would be cut off. Athens would be cut off. You wouldn't be able to get boats across places. He's going to just let all this fill in. And, what an evil, evil man. So this is, and then, there would be some key dams here. The extension of the Suez Canal. Sicily, the second dam to lower the Mediterranean Sea. Gibraltar, the main dam and power station. So it made tons of power. I mean, that's reasonable. But at this, God, this is a horrifying proposal that this man had. So Lantropa. And the design, the central feature of the Lantropa proposal was to build hydroelectric dams, such as the Adriatic Sea would be dried up. It's just, this is evil. This guy wanted to literally just destroy Croatia and turn it into a desert. And he clearly didn't understand ecological feedback loops. And that's why he was stopped. And it's crazy how much power that he had, because he was trying to push this stuff, and they were really, this could have happened. Eurocentric, pan-European, pacifist, neocolonial geopolitics. Things to understand, things to look into. A version of Lantropa project was put forward in Philip K. Dick's novel The Man in the High Castle. And Amazon Studios, The Man in the High Castle, former Reich Minister Martin Huseman proposed to drain the entire Mediterranean Sea with a dam across the Strait of Gibraltar. Another variation of the project was featured in the book Star Trek Motion Picture, but it did not make it to the screen. In Fallout 4, one can see a world map where there is no ocean between Europe and Africa at Fort Hagen. Okay, so all of this is it makes its way into pop culture. So Project Plowshare, nuclear tests, proving that this has already happened by Gerbois. And then again, just a reminder of the feedback loops. That's why we're looking at this. As the planet warms, ocean water expands, rising sea levels hit coastal cities hardest. Rainforest drought and loss. If something happens at a 1% rate and then it continues to happen, the feedback loop is 100%. So you end up with a faster, something that could take 100 years could take 1 year. And literally, it could take less time than 100 years is the most important thing. But it could take 1 year. And we don't even understand how quick these feedback loops happen and how quickly we can lose these things. So looking at, the African river system that flowed through under Sahara would rank 12th largest drainage basin on Earth today. Here's some pictures looking at the Sahara river system. And it looks like Mars, right? And we talk about Mars having these water paths that were messed up and that ended up drying out the desert because it was who knows, right? Who cares? But it's the same metaphor, at least. Who knows? Water changing the Nile, changing the Tamarisset, changing Niger, completely removed the biggest lake in the world, 2 or 3 of them. And the infrastructure that used to be the people traveling back and forth by boat has now been replaced by a few people traveling by desert. And this was not 300,000 or 7,000. We just read that physics article that this was within the last 1,000 years. And really, it shows you that somebody did something trying to do an evolutionary, human technological marvel, and it screwed everything up. Mysterious mustacils, giant 7,000-year-old stone monuments in Saudi Arabia baffle scientists. Mustacils are giant stone monuments that are about 7,000 years old. Arabic name mustacil means rectangle. So you start seeing these giant rectangles in the Arabian Desert, only occurring in the Arabian Desert. There is plenty of evidence that some of these areas were surrounded by volcanoes that went off, and that these are an ancient civilization that were lost, or that some of the people that survived were foreigners who'd been there, but most people who live in the area were completely destroyed. The team's hypothesis is that mustacils were built as a social mechanism to live in this challenging landscape. They may not have been the oldest buildings in the world, but they are uniquely large scale for the early period, more than 2,000 years before pyramids began to be constructed in Egypt. An interesting feature of these structures is despite very high visibility, we observed a few artifacts around them, but we did find this beautiful painted rock in the platform of one of the mesosils. So these guys were nomadic. They disappeared off. They left everything. The only thing left is the stone building that they were at. We'll get into that in a second. Again, with the Canal of the Pharaohs. Now, I showed you the map and how the pharaohs were connecting. Zagazig is a really interesting name. Zigazao, Zagazig. I have a friend from Jamaica who goes by Zagazao. And Zagazig comes up. Also, Zigzag is the name of the bad guy in The Thief and the Cobbler. But Hierapolis, Daphne, Sebastium, or Thebastum, Sebastium, and Seraphim, Serapium. This area where the lakes are connected to Cabrit in the Gulf of the Suez, to the Suez Canal, which was built. The Suez Canal allowed for even further connection between these things. Let's go back also. What was the Suez Canal supposedly built? Because again, I talk about the ancient Suez Canal, but 1858 formed the Suez Canal Company. 1859 to 1869. That's crazy. From 1858 to 69, within 10 years, they rebuild the canal. So it shows you also there was a canal here. We talked about the ancient canal idea, and that the Suez Canal was eventually replaced with a new Suez Canal because there was climate change from very quick feedback loops caused by humans. Here's the Nile. Here's the Canal of the Pharaohs. So you get this idea also where the water system is being diverted, thinking we have so much water. What's the big deal? Well, it caused major devastation. Oh, wait. Was there anything else there? No, I think that was enough. Francois L. Ruder. We did that. Meteor crash. Okay. How a meteor crash formed stunning desert glass. So this is another thing when we were talking about volcanoes and meteors earlier. A piece of the precious Libyan desert glass. Right? Let's go back in time. 20 million, bazillion, gajillion, quadrillion, gorillion years. This is the Miocene era, which formerly began India and Asia just began to collide and form the impressive mountain, and dinosaurs ruled the earth. Okay, sorry. Kelp forests, brown algae are appearing in diversifying oceans at rapid rates. In Europe and Africa, around 100 different species of early apes are monkeying around. Oh, this is one of the worst articles I've ever read. I'm just going to say Evan Nicole Brown. Okay. With this as the backdrop, let's zoom in on North Africa, specifically Libya, bordering the Mediterranean Sea on the north and Egypt to the east. It's about experiencing a geological miracle. Unbeknown to the colliding mountain and swinging apes of the Miocene, the 420 square miles that make up the Libyan desert, which is part of the Sahara, would soon be caramelized into shards of foggy green glass. Here you go. Here's the one sentence so far that was useful. The rare and precious material known as Libyan desert glass was found in King Tutankhamun's burial to millions of years later. What's going on? Who? This is the way they write articles. Okay. I'm going to disprove half of this stuff, maybe 90% of it. So, Libyan desert glass value comes from the miraculousness of its origin. I'm just trying to find the true stuff. It dumped a huge amount of heat, like in thousands of Fahrenheit degrees. Who wrote this article? This is the most embarrassing article I've ever seen. Okay, look. The point of this article was supposed to be that desert glass was considered invented in 1500 BC because of the burning of sand. And I'm just going to jump to the point. In the area of Libya, there's a number of very huge volcanoes. I'm having a hard time getting desert glass to load. I'm worried about that. That's annoying. Okay. What if I type in here Libyan desert glass? Will that get me anywhere? Uh-oh. What is happening? Hello? Anybody still there? Is it all lost? What happened? That's crazy. Anybody? What's going on? I think I'm having like a bug or something. What the heck's going on? I need to like check out someone let me know if you can hear this working, because I can't tell if it's working at all anymore. Oh boy. Bummer. I think my internet's down. Hello? What the heck? I'm so confused where everything is. This doesn't make any sense. If anybody, I'm gonna like check my phone. Like, is it working? Like, is it not working? Dude, something's wrong. Okay, I'm gonna disconnect. Okay, that sucks. Bummer.